Education Exchange is one mechanism that the Global Partnership for Education puts to the opportunities for national experts to engage in knowledge generation, knowledge mobilization, and capacity strengthening on the use of data and knowledge for better education planning and policy. The KIX initiative is implemented in partnership with the International Development Research Center in Canada. Our KIX EMAP Hub is one of the components of the wider KIX program. The KIX EMAP is short for Europe, Middle East, North Africa, and Asia Pacific region. We cover 36 countries, and our hub is hosted by NORAC, the Global Education Center in Geneva. This webinar covers two particular subregions: the subregion of Southeast Asia, where countries of Bhutan, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Nepal, Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Vietnam engage directly in this subregion. This subregion counts with Aditi Desai, my colleague who is here today in the webinar, as the lead for the engagement with these countries. And we also have today here our subregion of the Pacific that counts with 9 Pacific Island states: the Federated State of Micronesia, Fiji, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. And Seula Johansson Fua, she's our knowledge lead. She's leading the engagement with these Pacific Island states. So the webinar today, this topic of climate change and education, arrived as a demand from our national teams in Southeast Asia and Pacific Island states. So there is a demand for knowing more, for exploring this topic, the topic of climate change, that is changing our lives and the lives of our partner countries. So the webinar is intended for knowledge sharing, exchange, and open discussion on how education can change and can address the issue of climate change. And today we will start, and we are very happy to have with us a rich and diverse set of speakers. We'll start by hearing GPE, our colleague from GPE, who will talk about their approach on this topic. We'll have 2 key scholars who will talk from examples from Pacific, Indonesia. 2 key scholars will talk from examples from the United States and also from Southeast Asia, and also hear from country-level examples from Pacific, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So all of this is there will be open opportunities for all the participants today here to raise any questions, any comments by using the chat. There will be, after each presentation, there will be Q&A sessions for us to openly discuss your thoughts and your perspectives on this topic. And now, to give you with more precise information on the agenda, I hand over to my colleague Aditi Desai, who is the knowledge lead for Southeast Asia. Aditi Desai, please.
Thanks, Jose Luis. And as we mentioned, we start with hearing from GPE, from our first speaker, Sarah Beardmore. Just to introduce Sarah briefly, Sarah is the Strategic Partnerships and Capabilities Team Lead at the Global Partnership for Education, and is leading GPE's work on climate change, which includes mobilizing technical support, climate finance, and political momentum to leverage the power of education for climate action. Then we'll have a short round of Q&A through the chat, followed by our next speaker, Radhika Iyengar, who will be speaking on from her experiences in the United States. Dr. Radhika Iyengar is the Director of Education at the Center for Sustainable Development at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. And she leads the Education for Sustainable Development initiatives in her role. After that, we'll have our next speaker, Rosiana Laghi. Dr. Rosiana is the Deputy Head of School for Learning, Teaching and Quality at the School of Pacific Arts, Communication and Education at the University of the South Pacific. And she's a teacher by profession and a researcher who's focusing on an exploratory study of indigenous knowledge of climate change and education in Oahu, Fiji at the University of South Pacific. And after that, we'll hear some experiences from from Malaysia on mainstreaming climate change education and ESD in Malaysia from Subarna Sivapalan. Dr. Subarna is an associate professor and head of the School of Education at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. And she has over 20 years of experience within the higher education sector. And she's also actively involved in sustainability education advocacy at the national level. And then we move to Indonesia, where we hear from Stien Matakupan on climate change education in Indonesia. Stien is a special project and project advisor at PSPK, which is a Center for Education Research and Policy based in Indonesia. And her journey began as a high school teacher and a lecturer in Sampurna University in Jakarta. And finally, we will hear also experiences from Vietnam on climate change and education in Vietnam from Do De Clan, who is the head of the International Cooperation Division at the Vietnam Institute of Education Sciences and also at Ministry of Education and Training. And after each speaker's presentation, we'll have a very short Q&A from the chat, followed by an open discussion. So very excited to have such a diverse and interesting group of speakers. And with that, I hand it over to Sarah to kick us off with her first presentation. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Aditi. Thanks everyone for joining us. I am really delighted to be here with the KIX EMAP Hub. It's really a delight to be able to share with you. And if we can pull up my slides, I'll get started. Maybe just to introduce myself. I think most of you are familiar with the Global Partnership for Education, but we are the largest fund and partnership for education in the world. And in our work on climate smart education systems, we're really responding to country demand for increased support around the impacts of climate change. So we've developed a framework for action to help kind of structure our approach, really taking a systems lens to everything that we do. I'm not going to spend too long, outlining the challenge, because I think everyone on this call knows, even better than I, just how urgent it is for us to really mobilize education at the front lines of the climate crisis. Between 2022 and 24, over 400 million children were impacted by climate change. And it is really, I think, telling that surveys show about 75% of young people are afraid for their future. So we know that the climate crisis is not, it is here already. It is having direct impacts on children and their education, but also having lifelong consequences on children's well-being, on their future prospects, and is really one that we must address now. I think Johan Rockström is a Swedish scientist. He put it best when he said, "We've entered a decisive decade where the decisions that we take now and in the next 5 years will affect all future generations on the planet." So we really stand at a fork in the road where we either have a whole of society response to the climate crisis, and we mobilize that response through the education systems, or we really do face an existential and sort of planetary tipping point. So with that, let me dive in. It's no surprise then that many of our partner countries across the region, and in fact across the world, have been increasingly impacted by climate and therefore coming to GPE for support. So if we move to the next slide, we developed in response to this a framework, which we kind of used the term climate smart education systems in order to make sure that we were able to take a really holistic approach. So we've defined climate smart, which is a very plastic term, to include education systems that are able to protect the planet's life systems, right, to promote sustainability and more regenerative relationships with the Earth's ecosystems, but also an education system that's able to protect and advance the right to education despite climate impacts. So we wanted to make sure we looked at the bidirectional relationship between education and climate action. But really importantly for GPE, we also need to recognize that education is different everywhere. Climate impacts are different everywhere, and the impacts are very unequal. So we need to also have education systems that promote climate justice and that address the trenchant inequalities and power asymmetries that leave some people more vulnerable to climate impacts than others. This is really in support of GP's strategy, which aims to help support system transformation. And so we've taken a systems lens to how we look at climate smart education. And really to help us understand, if we move to the next slide, how we can work with ministries of education that are facing multiple complex challenges across the system. We looked at the 7 key dimensions, and within those, we look for entry points to help ministries identify strategies that can both protect the planet's life systems, protect the right to education, and advance climate justice. So just briefly, I'll go through some of these dimensions, and then I'll end with a bit of a snapshot of how some of this is actually working in practice in Cambodia, for example, with GPE support. First, in terms of policy and planning, for us, what we've identified as really critical is that we need national and subnational education sector planning to be crisis sensitive, but also to reflect education's role in climate action. And inversely, we also need to make sure that education is considered a priority sector in climate change strategies like nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans, but also disaster risk plans, environmental strategies. And we do see that education has been very undervalued in those plans. And then, of course, planning also needs to recognize the disproportionate impacts of climate-driven crises on the most vulnerable. Another dimension that we're supporting is data and evidence. So ministries need to have timely access and capacity to use data to support risk reduction and preparedness and adaptation. That data needs to be disaggregated to better address specific needs, data sources and systems, GIS data, meteorological data. And it needs to be analyzed and disseminated in a user-friendly and accessible for wider public awareness. We also look very particularly at the need for stronger coordination. And this is an area where we absolutely have to have interministerial coordination and mechanisms between the authorities that are responsible for education, climate change, and environment, but also disaster management authorities. And ministries of education need to proactively participate in national climate change decision-making, where they have typically not been particularly empowered. This also needs to join up with coordination in between humanitarian and development actors, and of course, mechanisms for South-South peer learning and cooperation, because we really need to make sure that our solutions are contextually relevant. Looking now at finance as another one of our dimensions, GPE is really proactively trying to support domestic finance mobilization in a sustainable manner. We also are looking to unlock international climate funding for education. We want to link equitable finance mechanisms with climate and environmental considerations and make sure that there are frameworks for monitoring those expenditures and making sure they're being spent on what's needed. The next dimension is physical infrastructure. So we all know that actually when people think about climate, they think about destroyed school buildings. So we need to make sure that schools are constructed in a way that are green and safe, that if they're used as shelters, that they actually are plans in place for those schools to revert to places of learning as quickly as possible. We also need to use schools as a whole learning environment where you can incorporate various aspects of school gardens, rainwater harvesting, and other strategies, sourcing school construction materials locally, and of course, community participation around sustainable infrastructure planning is really, really key. The last two dimensions are potentially the most important. So we look at curriculum, learning, and teaching. Obviously, when we think about education for sustainable development, we think about a lot of the curriculum reforms that are possible. But we also want to make sure not just that the curriculum is interdisciplinary and integrates climate change and environment, but also that the pedagogy and the standards enable relevant and engaging and inspiring climate education. It needs to be active learning, focusing on student assessment that actually includes practical skills and behavioral shifts in addition to just, the acquisition of knowledge. We also want to make sure that curricula has a really strong emphasis on resilience in the face of adverse and traumatic impacts, because these are actually really, really important. And obviously all of this requires capacity building for teachers, professional development support for them across all of these areas of reform. And then finally, schools serve as community hubs. So they link to communities, they can provide information to communities, but also draw on community members' knowledge about their environments and about climate impacts. We also want to make sure that multi-stakeholder groups involved in risk reduction activities at school come together and really use school and community-based platforms for climate change, disaster risk, and environmental action and learning. The thing about our systems level approach is that you can't have change in one of these dimensions without it being reinforced and sustained through changes in other dimensions. So when we take a systems approach, we were trying to say we need to actually work with a comprehensive holistic lens with changes across all of these dimensions if we're really going to shift systems, radically and rapidly towards more climate smart strategies. I'll just end with a little bit of a description of our work in Cambodia. GPE's support for climate smart systems is being implemented through our traditional grants, grant financing for governments, but also through a technical assistance partnership that we have with UNESCO, IIEP, and Save the Children, and a partnership that we've developed with the Green Climate Fund to help bring climate finance into the education sector alongside education financing. So through those sort of three different instruments, we're providing support. And if we move to the next couple of slides, we have just an example from Cambodia. I would just say that Cambodia's own national leadership has been really exemplary. And so we're coming in to support, gaps in what they're already doing. And this is really just a reflection of the kinds of things that GPE is supporting. But nonetheless, you can see, for policy and planning, we're right now helping them to develop a climate risk analysis, an operational plan for climate change adaptation, helping to include education measures in their climate change strategy. We start to generate learning, we hope to come back to this community and be able to share more about what strategies have been effective and what kind of work is actually relevant for potentially other contexts. So I hope this is not the last, not the first, but not the last time that we have a chance to exchange here. Thanks, and sorry if I took too much time and spoke too quickly, but had a lot to get through. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Sarah. And I think that's a great framing, especially the Climate Smart Initiative framework. I think today we'll get a chance to hear from different experiences that touch upon all those 7 aspects covered under the Climate Smart Initiative, including policy planning, mainstreaming, curriculum, pedagogy, etc. So yeah, just if there are any questions from the chat, we'll just spend a couple of minutes with you, Sarah, on that, and then we go on to the next speaker. We have one question from Shin Tanabe, which asks, of course, it depends on various contexts, but regarding the 7 initiatives that GP advocates, which should be prioritized by most governments as the initial step in addressing climate change in schools. Yeah, and others, please feel free to keep adding your comments in the chat. So Sarah, if you can throw some light on that.
Sure. Well, I think that the prioritization of which activities to undertake in which of the dimensions really depends on the context. So what we're seeing is that actually in most countries, the first activity that gets undertaken is a climate risk analysis to understand what are the kinds of drivers of vulnerability and how are they impacting education. And it's only on that basis where you understand what schools are experiencing, what types of vulnerabilities, who the most affected groups are, that then you can start to see where the weaknesses are across the 7 dimensions of the system and then try to target. Those climate risk analyses are also a prerequisite for climate finance. And so for any climate finance proposal, you have to have a very, very clear evidence base in terms of the climate drivers of vulnerability. So that really is sort of almost a necessary prerequisite for all of this work. Yeah, thanks.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And we have one more question from Rain, who works with Business Development APAC from Cambridge Press and Assessment. How can other organizations take part in this climate smart framework implementation and to activate the partnerships factor within the system?
It's a great question. And I mean, I think that the climate smart framework is one for all of us to use to try to understand how our work needs to connect together and be jointly interwoven. And so in that sense, you are already a part of a system. And so in every country, there'll be different opportunities. For example, the local education group policy dialogue is one. There are national education coalitions of civil society that can help to feed in some of the work and the expertise into the policy. But ultimately, we need action at all levels, you know, from central to decentralized. And I think the framework is hopefully a way to help all partners organize themselves to work together.
Great, thanks. So I don't see any other questions. So maybe now we move on to the next presentation, and we'll have a chance to come back to Sarah when we have the open discussion. So Dr. Radhika Iyengar is our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Aditi, and such an honor to be here. Also such an honor to follow Sarah's presentation. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to present some, I guess, thinking and some views from my experience in the United States. I am living in New Jersey in United States, originally from India, and have been working at Columbia University on education for sustainable development. And I've been looking for sustainable development in the United States for a very long time. And so maybe you can help answer some of these questions. And I saw in the chat that someone is focusing on a curriculum on education for sustainable development. That's great. If you can write in the chat other initiatives that you all have on ESD in curriculum and elsewhere, please, informal education, non-formal, informal. Please definitely write those comments in the chat. I'll be looking forward to reading some of those. Just to give you a recap, and I know this group is already familiar with all of this, but just to lay the foundation of where I'm going with this. Focusing on sustainable development started in the early 1960s with Silent Spring and Limits of Growth. And in the 1970s, we saw the use of sustainable development. It started coming in much more, it became much more common. 1992 with Agenda 21, the UN conference had adopted this environment and development focus. And so it was environment and development. It was not just environment. 2002, with the World Summit on Sustainable Development, it became like, it became solidified. This whole idea of sustainable development became a part of discussing about human, equitable, and caring society. It became a synonym with human dignity for all. So sustainable development became like a buzzword starting in 2002. And then in the United States, there was some glimpse of sustainable development, which was initially called sustainability, social programs, smart growth under the Bush administration. And then in 1993, President Clinton convened the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which was again the first time we started using, so the US started using sustainable development in government proceedings. But after a short life of 6 years, this again went down, and there was no commitment towards sustainable development as such. And this whole idea of in and out of sustainable development actually still continues. And there's been this disjointed effort with the Environment and Protection Agency in the US, which is focusing on the environment sciences piece in the formal curriculum, but really leaving out the social dimension, the governance dimension, the economic dimension that Sarah very nicely covered before. So there is a big problem here if you only focus on the science part. And I hope that we can learn from this mistake, and maybe in the examples in the chat, you can mention the whole idea of how you are implementing education for sustainable development in your own setting. So again, UNESCO has been focusing a lot on education for sustainable development, as we know, and there's a lot of adoption of sustainable development, starting with the 17 goals, the 2030 agenda, as we know, and many member states have adopted sustainable development. But it is very unfortunate that many countries still also don't report the voluntary national reviews, including the United States, even though they have agreed that they will follow sustainable development. So again, we don't know how it is tracked, how it is measured, and what is the real commitment that United States has on sustainable development. Again, something to think about on a national level. So I want to give this example of New Jersey. I live in New Jersey, work at New York. So it's a very progressive state, and just giving you an example of how New Jersey has been tracking the dashboards here, which includes like all of the sustainable development goals, and some of them are going up, some of them are going down. So the indicators really tell us where things are. And these are some of the rankings, and at least there is a way of like tracking these goals so that we can have some sort of a benchmark. And I'm hoping that within the US and within the state, we can also go narrow and focus on local councils. But maybe that's the next step that's going to be followed. In New Jersey, there was actually a big movement, very, very interesting movement that happened just before COVID. In June 2020, the New Jersey state became the first state to incorporate K-12 education, and climate change was integrated across all K-12 grades, and it was implemented in all of the public schools. In March 2021, a new climate change thought committee was formed, and this committee was then funded by the Governor Murphy, who announced $5 million to be used for climate change education work, mainly for teacher training, which was fantastic. It was not just a mandate; it was a mandate that was carried on with funding available. And just to again, there are a lot of materials being covered, a lot of curriculums being developed. There's a climate change hub, New Jersey Climate Change Hub, that hosts all these materials. So really, lot of improvement in terms of how climate change education is integrated. And the learning goal here is leveraging the passions, the passion students have shown for this critical issue, and providing them opportunities to develop an deep understanding of science behind the changes to explore the solutions our world desperately needs. Again, I'm still missing the sustainable development part here. Education for sustainable development is still missing, and I think that's something that we can really learn from, on how we need to make this climate education more comprehensive by looking at all different aspects, not just one aspect. So why is this really important? I just want to take us back to our target 4.7, which talks holistically about sustainable development, which includes the sustainable development, all the pillars, the social pillar, the economic pillar, the environment pillar, and good governance. And to be focusing on that, Columbia University, along with some other partners, including UNESCO, including Ban Ki-moon Foundation, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we've come together to form this mission 4.7 that really, targets SDG 4.7, working with various governments, and also promoting the idea that we have to look at all of this holistically. So we've come up with this framework where justice and sustainability is at the center, and in all the work that we do, and maybe this will resonate with a lot of you who are already working towards this goal and are taking all of these aspects: global citizenship, gender, human rights, planetary citizenship, peace, sustainable development. So see, sustainable development is only one part of it, but there are so many other aspects that 4.7 has that we really need to focus on. This would be my plea, that we can take all of these things, ideas together, and maybe somewhere create some sharing mechanism, case studies that we can learn from each other, so that we can really push for SDG 4.7 rather than just one or two aspects, because clearly we need a much more holistic perspective than what we have currently. I just wanted to share this really amazing UNESCO guideline that came about, very recently released. It talks about a systems approach, and it's the latest guidance that UNESCO has on greening curriculum. And here we are seeing how all of these different aspects are included: environment, social, and economic, which includes all these different buckets. I think it's really comprehensive, and I would really urge us to take a look at this guidance and see how our work can be influenced by all of these different aspects. And because it's so much easy, it's really easy to forget about different aspects if we have a certain inclination towards something. So I think it's great that there is this guidance, and we can always go back and check this document and see whether we are covering all our bases in terms of post-carbon economy, sustainable lifestyle, resilience, climate justice, climate science, ecosystems, and biodiversity. I thought that that's a really neat way of looking at curriculums and looking at what we are trying to approach. So ending with a really positive note, BUS has come back to being a UNESCO member, and I hope that we'll be able to continue this momentum and learn from UNESCO's guidance in terms of greening of education, and use this opportunity to really build the momentum on education for sustainable development. And I hope that we'll take this idea in a much more holistic sense, rather than a very narrow definition of what climate education could be. And I hope that we'll be able to have much more of a sustainability, justice focus, as well as a much more equity focus in what we do, because clearly we don't have the liberty anymore to look at just one aspect or the other. And I thought that this probably would be a very interesting lesson from what I have seen so far, that can be applied to various settings, and especially in the Southeast Asian setting and the Pacific setting, so that we can learn from all of the terminologies. We can learn from creating a much more comprehensive and holistic framework as we go forward. So I'll stop there, and we'll see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Radhika, for such a great presentation with some important messages. I think the holistic approach to it is a very important point for us to continue discussing during this webinar. Thank you also for sharing the examples and for the message on learning from each other. I think this is something that is really important, and we hope that this is also something that the participants today will take out of this webinar. So let's start with one of the questions that we received in the chat. And in the meantime, I welcome other participants. Please include any questions that you would like to address to Radhika. So let's start with a question from Sonan Vangmo, if I'm not mistaken, is from Bhutan. And he's asking, how can schools, universities, and educators measure the impact of integrating SDGs into their teaching? And what metrics or tools are useful for evaluating student understanding and engagement with SDG-related topics? If you have any suggestions, recommendations for that, Radhika, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Marina. I think this is a very good question. And sometimes I feel that we can take this guidance of SDG 4.7. There are some metrics there, but we have to make it our own, and we have to measure based on what we are working on. So amongst this entire holistic perspective, if we have taken whatever elements, we need to have our own indicators and have our own measuring system, because other if we take like a really global perspective, we will miss out on the nuances of what we are doing in the universities and in schools. So I would suggest that we need to develop our own metrics in alignment with the SDGs, especially SDG target 4.7, taking global citizenship education, taking education for sustainable development, but really measuring it based on what we are doing. And there is no global measurement as such that speaks to specific interventions that we are doing in every country, every university. In fact, every institution is different. So I would suggest to again build your own and work on your own indicators so that they have more meaning to you, and to measure the progress rather than taking a very broad global perspective and then not really measuring the progress that you've made over the past couple of years since the time you started implementing the intervention. I hope that makes sense.
That certainly does. Thank you for sharing those reflections, Radhika. We have another question that came in from Fiji, and which is particularly building on what you're just saying. So it's referring to SDG 4.7, mainstreaming ESG and GCED into national education priority, curriculum, teacher education, and student assessments. From this participant's perspective, ESG is more practical, 100% practical. And then they ask, how can we assess SDG in students' assessments? And in your perspective on whether it's worthy to assess ESG in examinations?
It is definitely worthy to assess in examination, but the way we assess is very, I think, needs some kind of rethinking. The way we are assessing is fill in the blanks, match the column, like very much like, okay, do you know this? Do you know that? Do you know all the 17 SDG? Do you do plastic picking? Do you do this? I think we need to really go beyond those metrics and create our own versions of, participatory learning, create our own versions of how are we solving our local problems, how are we building a community with intergenerational aspects, participatory learning. So many ways of assessing can be utilized in a way which are really speaking to what the students are learning and how they are connecting the school education with the current problems they are facing. So I feel that we need to really reassess how we are doing the assessments, using different ways of doing formative assessments, and also trying to see how we are trying to engage the community and schools and all of these aspects together, rather than using our traditional assessments, I would say, and trying to be a little bit more innovative in assessment itself, and trying to be a little bit more innovative in how can this assessment help us to correct our own teaching, correct our own teaching practices going forward. I think there needs to be a revamp of how assessments are done using using any sustainable development goals framework or education for sustainable development.
Thank you, Radhika, for those reflections. We have a lot of interesting questions coming in the chat, all put together two of them so that you can address them in one go. And the first one is, I think, building on the conversation we're having just now on assessments, but more into how ESG can be integrated in the curriculum. So we have this question from Anton Surawi, Indonesia, on how has climate change education been integrated into the curriculum of schools in the US, and how important is the role of teachers in raising climate change awareness among students? And if you don't mind, I'll ask also another question that came from Nepal, which is more on a reflection piece on whether do you see the globe prioritizing education for sustainable development, or is it being replaced by the speech on climate change? How do these two universes of climate change and education for sustainable development overlap with each other, on your perspective?
I think climate change education is a subset of education for sustainable development, because sustainable development is an umbrella I see which includes so many different pillars. So I feel that climate change is one aspect of sustainable development. And if you've seen the trajectory of sustainable development, of course, it has a huge trajectory on how this word came about. And so I think doing justice to climate change and education for sustainable development, we need to see how comprehensive we can be with all of these aspects: the social dimension, the economic dimension, the environment dimension. I think all of these, and the governance piece, all of these have to fit together. And no matter what jargon we use, but I think taking a much more holistic approach is definitely what is needed. And some examples I think in the US have been really terrific, where they have utilized the social capital or the funds of knowledge of the community members, because we come in the US, we come with so many different countries, we are all here, and it includes a rich diverse base. And so in some schools I see a lot of that being integrated into the schools, especially the social aspect, the cultural aspect. So a lot of global citizenship education is included. I just hope that we can leverage this global citizenship education, leadership skills, youth empowerment, to channel its energies towards education for sustainable development. Right now, I am seeing this as two different buckets: education for sustainable development and global citizenship education, but they are not really separate buckets. I'm hoping that we can see in the next couple of years, student leadership, youth leadership has been tremendous in the US. And so how can all of that be integrated into the curriculum and into learning about education for sustainable development with so many new tools, AI, GIS mapping, so many other things have come up. I don't want to take a lot of time, but I think that there's a lot of scope and lot of new thinking and innovation that we can leverage from in the US, especially for promoting climate education and education for sustainable development.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And I'm sure we will continue this discussion and build from your experience and other experience as we go along with the webinar as well. I would like now to invite our next speaker, Rosiana Laji, who will share with us some case studies from Fiji and Tuvalu. Rosiana.
Bulavinaka, everyone, and greetings from the University of the South Pacific. It's an honor to be here and be able to share some of the climate activities that the University of the South Pacific have been carrying out to help us understand our people's experiences with climate change and collaboratively implement relevant interventions. So education reaches the mass of our people, and education plays a vital role in ensuring climate justice and climate readiness. However, in small island developing states, the destruction of educational infrastructure and misaligned policies are just some of the hindrance to name a few. Next slide, please. So first, let me just situate Oceania or the Pacific before I commence any further. So Oceania is a collection of islands, and it is the smallest continent. The collection of islands are grouped into 4 geographical regions. You can see in the map, Australasia, Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. 12 of these countries are owners or members of the University of the South Pacific, which is a regional, one of the only 2 regional universities in the world. And the University of the South Pacific has campuses in its 12 member countries. And through this, we are able to influence some of the educational agenda through our higher education programs, research, and regional programs like the Pacific Regional Education Framework, or PECREF. Next slide, please. The 2 countries that I will focus my presentation on, next slide, please, are Fiji and Tuvalu. Fiji is an archipelago of more than 300 islands. It is about 18,300 square kilometers with volcanic islands and coral atolls. Tuvalu, on the other hand, is about 26 square kilometers with reef islands and atolls. Now, despite their differences in landform features and location, both are threatened by climate change. Food and water security are threatened, and so are our livelihoods and identity. Next slide, please. For both countries and in Oceania, our vanua or whenua, which is inclusive of our land, ocean, sky, people, and spirits that are related with each other and to each other, is our source of knowledge, life, and mana, or power and prosperity. Our vanua or whenua have been threatened by climate change, and we look to education to ensure that our people are climate ready and our islands are climate proofed and resilient. The strongest cyclone that's ever recorded in Fiji and in the southern hemisphere, Cyclone Winston, damaged completely wiped out 495 out of 901 schools in Fiji in 2016. The total cost of the destruction was 20 million USD. Today, some schools have not been rebuilt, and some students are still traumatized by their Winston experience. Now, we can't put a price tag on the trauma experienced by the students and teachers, but there are students who did not continue school after TC Winston. Next slide, please. Climate change is an added stressor to our vanua or whenua or environment, reducing our land size, threatening our food and water security, more so our health, next slide please, contributing to eco-anxiety and other non-communicable diseases. Next slide please. The threat on our sources of food, water, and livelihoods have put a pressure on our economy. Next slide please. The increase in the cost of land lease and rent, food, and education has exacerbated pressure on our government and businesses. Next slide, please. In addition, create tensions in the homes and society as a whole. For instance, the decrease in fish yields, crop production that our people rely on as source of food and income have contributed to stress and anxiety amongst parents. In some cases, adults let off steam on their family members, causing tensions in the homes and in the community. Next slide, please. As our vanua, whenua is threatened by the increase in temperature, sea level rise, and coastal erosion, it consequently exacerbates the loss of our sources of knowledge, culture, traditions, and heritage. Next slide, please. Despite this, our people are documenting and digitizing traditional wisdom, science, and practices so they are able to pass this on to our generation to come. Next slide, please. But what is education doing? Next slide, please. According to a survey funded by the United Kingdom Research and Innovation via the Climate U, or the Transforming Universities for a Changing Climate project that was conducted in 3 universities in Fiji, the University of Fiji, the University of the South Pacific, and the Fiji National University, the 6,000 students stated that higher education plays a significant role in climate literacy and justice. Participants from the 3 universities stated that climate change is woven into the higher education curriculum and that they are involved in climate activities in the communities, but they added that more work can be and should be done. Next slide, please. In a participatory research, action research that's funded by the UKRI via the Climate U, the 3 universities collaboratively worked with 4 communities, creating awareness, capacity building, and documenting traditional science and wisdom, trying to ensure that these communities are climate ready. Next slide, please. In a qualitative case study carried out in a community primary school in Fiji, it was found that climate change is taught in the years 4 to 8 social science, general subject, and elementary science syllabi. More so, students and their parents are involved in climate activities in school. Furthermore, students are also learning about climate change from the media and faith-based organizations. However, according to the students, there is not enough climate change-related reading resources in school. In addition, the curriculum is silent on the traditional ecological knowledge of climate change. Hence, the Climate U's bilingual big book project of climate stories written by the members of the communities in their community language for their children. Next slide, please. Apart from the role that the USP and other higher education institutions doing in Fiji, indigenous communities have already been using their traditional ecological knowledge and practices to build resilient communities. Right? For these communities, communal work or collaborative efforts, as in the Sole Solevaki concept, is paramount in addressing climate issues or any societal issues. So in doing so, are able to pass on their knowledge and practices to each other and also benefit collectively from their work. Next slide, please. Finally, climate change affects everyone, irrespective of gender, race, ability, or location. Therefore, while education has an important role to play, every one of us has a role to play for our survival. As such, we should take a collaborative approach, as highlighted by Sarah, in creating relevant interventions for preparing our people through education. Just as the garland is stunning and gives off a beautiful scent because it is neatly woven with all the flowers playing its part, so should we be in our journey for climate justice and the climate preparedness of our children and people. If the flowers fall off, the garland will fall apart. Similarly, if we don't genuinely collaborate, all our efforts will be in vain. So it's action time now. Let's put our efforts together for our survival. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening and getting us to participate in this webinar.
Thank you very much, Rosiana, for a wonderful message, for giving us a look into the reality of the Pacific Island states, the different pressures you are facing with climate change, and the way to address it as well, and the power of culture and the indigenous knowledge for us to work together in sorting this out. I invite all the audience to ask any questions, pose any comments in the chat. We have received a question from a colleague of yours from Fiji, from the University of South Pacific, Moana, and she's asking, to what extent is indigenous knowledge specifically linked to early warning system already in the curriculum of Fiji and Tuvalu, talking about how indigenous knowledge is being integrating into the curriculum. If you could comment on this, Rosiana.
Yes, and I think I mentioned that in my presentation. The curriculum is silent on the use of traditional ecological knowledge, and so are the policies on climate change. So currently, we are working through the Pacific Regional Education Framework, another institution, in trying to assist the Fiji's Ministry of Education in reviewing its curriculum and try to weave in the traditional ecological knowledge of climate change, weather forecasting, as well as some of the traditional adaptation strategies.
Rosiana, thank you so much. And I think it's good that we are clear in terms of what's happening now, what needs to be done in the future, also in the Pacific Island states in terms of curriculum integration. While we wait for more comments and questions, I will take use of my position as facilitator in this moment to ask you a question. When we were hearing the first part of your presentation, you talk about the different pressures that are affecting the Pacific Island states, and also about eco-anxiety and the anxiety that derives and impacts the lives of everyone in Pacific Island states. I want to ask your opinion from your perception of the youth, of the overall population. How is the optimism and how is the strength to deal with this issue? How do you see the general stamina, the general mood of the population to address climate change? I would like to get your views on that, how to deal with eco-anxiety, and how do you see population dealing with that?
Thank you. And as mentioned in the survey, the young people are ready. They would volunteer to participate in climate activities. But one of the things that clearly came out in communities that are affected by climate change, for example, in Tuvalu, as well as in one of the communities that we worked with on climate displacement. The children themselves are anxious about the impacts of climate change. One of the children that we spoke with in Tuvalu said, I'm scared, I'm worried that one day I might drown. Not drown, the island drowning, but the child herself drowning, because the area you will notice in the photo has reduced, and so has their play area. And currently, their play area during any king tide is inundated or flooded. So they're worried that, there may come a day that they may not be able to play in that area anymore. Or if, in worst case scenario, they may drown. So children already are preparing. In one of the videos that we did in Tuvalu, we met a young boy who was putting on floaters and swimming on the beach. And we asked him, what are you doing? He said, oh, I'm just putting this and trying it on, the floaters. Why are you trying it on? Then he said, oh, if the big waves come, then I'll be able to float to Fiji. We said, hey, but your parents have a boat. He said, well, the boat will be filled with people. There'll be no space for me. So I'm already preparing of what I will do if the big waves come. So children are already anxious, and if they might not show it, in their faces, as they are happy people, they're already anxious about what they expect to be coming if nothing is done.
Thanks so much, Rosiana, for sharing concrete examples and also for your, despite all the pressures that Pacific Island states are facing, your positive message at the end of us weaving and collaboratively working together in this solution. Let's look at more solutions and more actions that need to be taken in the wider open Q&A session that we'll put together all speakers. And now let's move forward in our webinar. And I invite Subarna, who is Associate Professor and Head of the School of Education in the University of Nottingham in Malaysia, to drive us into her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jose. Can you all hear me clearly? Yes, thank you. All right. Thank you for the introductions, and I want to congratulate all presenters who did a superb presentation before me, and in setting a very interesting context for our webinar today. Yes, thank you so much for your for sharing the slides. So, what I'll be sharing with everyone today are perspectives from Malaysia. Are we okay with the slides? Yes? Okay.
Just checking, can you see the slides?
I can see the slides, but I also see like a...
There is a small box on the
Yes.
On the right bottom.
Sorry, let me try again.
Let's
I got
try
a
again.
message that it was paused. Give me just a moment.
Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Yeah. So, so yes, as introduced just now, I am Subarna. I am from Malaysia, born and raised here. And currently, I am the head of School of Education at the University of Nottingham. We have a campus in Malaysia with headquarters in the UK. We have another campus in China too. So, we welcome collaboration with everyone here on this platform today as well. Besides being head of school, I also have a very important responsibility. So, the University of Nottingham hosts the UNESCO Chair in International Education and Development, and so I lead the Malaysia office. So, it's very interesting to see colleagues and different stakeholders representing so many different sectors here today. So, hopefully, there are opportunities for us to work together after the end of this webinar today. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So I think for obvious reasons, I want to set the context here from a teaching perspective, coming from somebody, leading a school of education. And the focus of our webinar today is, climate change education. So I think, teachers have a very, very important role to play in moving climate change education and education for sustainable development forward. So I want to highlight this quote taken from UNESCO about how teachers can play a more crucial role in advancing these in advancing this agenda forward, right? So teachers stand at the forefront of localized change, introducing students to the knowledge, skills, values, and abilities to act sustainably, live together peacefully, and build a more just, fair society. Yeah. So in Malaysia, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So in Malaysia, we subscribe to the SDGs. We advocate for the SDGs and SDG target 4.7, SDG 4 particularly is something that we look at very, very in a lot of depth. So the slides that come after this, I will showcase to you some of the, not yet. Yes, thank you. In the upcoming slides, I will showcase to you some of the work that has been ongoing in Malaysia as a whole. Yeah. So target 4.7, Radhika has mentioned this just now. So I'm not going to go into describing or detailing its definition, but I'd like to pick up one of the comments that one of our audience put in the chat just now, about defining sustainability or defining education for sustainability. And I feel, those of us operating from a context that is not Western we have to look into ways in which we can localize these definitions to suit our context and the work we do in our region, right? And also taking into account the various indigenous perspectives and indigenous wisdom that we have in this particular region. So contextualizing this definition is important if we want to get work on the ground more successfully, and that's my personal opinion. So I hope the member in the audience just now who asked about the definition, could take note of what I think about this perspective. So besides Target 4.7, I want to introduce you to a few other concepts as well. And if you are an enthusiast and if you are working in the ESD space at a global level, I think these are some concepts that you would definitely have come across. ESD, the ESD roadmap, okay, ESD 2030 roadmap, the global action priority areas. There are 5 priority areas, from advancing policy to transforming learning environments, building capacity of educators, empowering and mobilizing youth, and also accelerating local level actions. These are some of the priority areas that have been suggested to be incorporated in ESD work in countries, yeah. And then now we have the Greening Education Partnership. I believe Sarah mentioned this briefly in her session. So the GEP is now an initiative under UNESCO that's working very closely with stakeholders at all levels and from most regions in the world, actually, to develop guidelines and guidance documents to enable climate change education, not only within formal education systems, but also informal education systems and also within community education. And I particularly am doing some work on the drafting group for the community greening work group. So if you'd like to be part of this conversation and offer your voice to this work that we're doing in the GEP, focusing particularly on greening communities, do send me a note and I'll let you know how you can be involved further. All right. So if we can move to the next slide. Yes. So Malaysia, I hope everybody knows where Malaysia is. The easiest way to describe Malaysia is we are below Thailand and just above Singapore, right? And we also have the Borneo Islands, Sabah and Sarawak. So we are reaching close to 40 million in population. And education usually gets a very good budget every year in the yearly financial budget that the government puts forward. So we have a blueprint at 2 levels. The first is the preschool to post-secondary education level, and the other is the higher education level. So this blueprint is the key document, or if I can use the term Bible, that we refer to when we develop action plans for education at these 2 levels, right? And these blueprints have withstood, change, in politics in this country. So from the 2013 window until 2025 is when this blueprint is in force, and beyond 2025 there are already initiatives ongoing to move forward the next phase of the blueprint. Okay. All right. Yes, thank you. If we can go to the next slide. All right. So I'm a researcher and I'm an educator within the higher education context, and I teach students who are going to become teachers. Okay. But this is what I've been doing for the past 2.5 years. But prior to this, I was with an institution that was focused on technical studies. And through my work in that institution, I was involved in several national studies to test waters, all right, about implementation and mainstreaming of climate change in Malaysia particularly. So this is one of the national studies that we did. It's a very pilot scale study And we wanted to test to see if, what is envisioned in the blueprint of both countries, is actually in practice on the ground, right? It's very nice to have blueprints. It's very nice to have things on paper, but on the ground, the realities are very, very different. So this study we carried out was during COVID actually, and it involved several of the stakeholders that you see, in the slide here. So we spoke to key stakeholders. We also ran a short scale survey in the next slide. If you can go to the next slide. Yeah. So I would like to highlight just one key finding from that survey that we conducted. Simply because it's very relevant to work we do in education. So interestingly, people who we sent the surveys out to suggested that schools are not the preferred reliable choice for climate change education, and that's quite concerning. Yeah, that's quite concerning for us. Yeah, if we can move on. All right. So, following that study, we also ran a baseline study with collaboration from the Ministry of Education here in Malaysia. And the purpose of this study was actually to gauge the extent to which environmental education and education for sustainable development is infused within the formal education system here in Malaysia. Right? So we looked at primary, secondary, and also the Form 6 component. The Form 6 is the pre-U component. And this study involved close to 2,000 respondents, and the levels or the types of respondents that were involved were students, teachers, and school leadership. All right. If we can go to the next slide. I'll share with you some of the reflection points from the study. So very quickly, there are 5 points that I think would bring about good discussion here, because I think these issues are pretty much global and experienced in many countries around the world too, and its education systems. So the first thing is on effective school leadership. So what we found is through our study, teachers and school leaders in particular, yes, they are very committed to wanting to put forward the teaching of climate change, the teaching of sustainability, and all, but they lack capacity building in this area. So in Malaysia, we have the Ministry of Education looking into the training of teachers and school leaders, and at the moment, training on sustainability education, and climate change education is rather limited. So we are hoping to close this gap soon with the implementation of our new education blueprint. Right. Next, approaches for EE or not next slide. Thank you. Approaches for EE or ESD within classroom and integration of EE or ESD within the classroom is very much teacher dependent. So, for example, if I am a science teacher or a geography teacher, the possibilities of me talking about sustainability are higher. But if I'm a teacher teaching English or mathematics or moral studies or art, I would probably not be talking about sustainability in my classroom. And is that the fault of the teacher? I don't think so, right? It's not the fault of the teacher, but it's the way the system has been developed over these many years. So this is something that we need to look into and we need to change. Now, the other thing that we discovered is also that there is no interdisciplinary teaching and learning happening. Now, if we want to advocate for climate change education and if we want to advocate for education for sustainable development, we cannot be teaching subjects in schools or universities in silo. All right, it has to be integrated, because sustainability and climate change are all interlinked, right? The interlinkages are great between the pillars. Next, teachers are unsure which curriculum topics have embedded ESD or ESD elements for integration in selected subjects. So we looked at the curriculum, we looked at textbooks, and then we spoke to teachers about this as well. And they are unsure which curriculum topics have EE or ESD elements in it. All right. Next, besides the formal curriculum, there's also the co-curricular programs in schools, and these involve clubs, societies, or students taking part in national or international competitions and things like that. So there are examples, or there are instances of ESD and EE and even climate action being embedded in through these programs. Okay, that's good. So that's a good thing, and we want to see more of this happening. All right, but most importantly, what we want to see, if there is one main key idea that we would like to highlight from this report, which we have also shared with our Ministry of Education, is the need for more training for our teachers and school leaders to enable integration of climate change education and to enable the integration of ESD and sustainability. We need to train our school leaders and we need to train our teachers. They are the key enablers for this to happen. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. All right. So besides those two studies that I shared with you earlier, in Malaysia, what we have successfully done last year actually is to bring stakeholders together, stakeholders within and beyond the education sector here in Malaysia. So we've developed actually a coalition for ESD, National Strategic Partners. So you have Ministry of Education, and you have entities like WWF, foundations working on climate change education, like Green Growth Asia Foundation, funders like Amana Alam Lestari, and experts, from my university, Sunway University, and University Malaya, coming together to envision an action plan for ESD. Now, the purpose of us developing this coalition is actually to enable better implementation of ESD on the ground in Malaysia, and to maximize or to capitalize on the expertise of the various stakeholders and entities within this education ecosystem. So we are very, very excited on the establishment of this coalition, because it has actually taken us more than 10 years. I've been working in this area since 2010, and it's 2024 now. So it's a journey. It's a long journey, but it's bearing results now. So we're very, very happy about this. Okay. So if we can move to the next slide. All right. Besides the coalition, I think Radhika will know this well, SDSN. So I'm a senior fellow with SDSN myself, and we actually kicked off a teacher training pilot focused on ESD. And we are now in the phase of analyzing the data from this pilot study. There's a lot of opportunity for us to scale this pilot study within the Asian region. So if there are colleagues here who are interested to look at ways in which we could scale this, I'll be happy to have a chat with you. All right. And next slide, please. All right. So what are things coming ahead for us? So we are hoping with the 2025 ending for the two blueprints, there are going to be new initiatives outlined in the 2026 to 2026 blueprint, the upcoming blueprint. And I'm really happy to share with everyone that climate change education, ESD, and sustainability are going to feature very prominently in the new blueprint. Yeah, so we have had many consultations with Ministry of Education, and I want to applaud the Ministry of Education Malaysia actually, because they have done a lot of fact finding. They have done a lot of on the ground consultation with stakeholders within and beyond the sector of education. And we are definitely going to be seeing a lot more of ESD in the upcoming blueprint. my fingers are crossed at the moment. We are hoping for some very, very interesting initiatives kicking off. And we've been working towards this, for the X number of years that we've been, a nation, operating as a nation. Okay. Now, the primary and secondary education blueprint and the higher education blueprint are both going to have elements of sustainability, ESD, and all embedded, with higher education particularly looking at planetary health. All right. So as a scholar and as an academic, I'm more interested in how we are going to be navigating through these blueprints and action plans that come out of it. I think this transition is now very, very critical. Yeah, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so I have a lot more to share, but was only given 10 minutes. Maybe another webinar would do. So thank you so much for the opportunity and welcome questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Subarna. I'm just looking through the chat and we have a couple of questions, but we'll just take two of them and then move to the next speaker, and then we have some time in the end for questions. So,
Sure.
and if you can answer briefly, I'm just aware that we have two more presentations. So one question is, what challenges do you face when embedding SDGs into teacher education programs? And the second question is, based on, so you mentioned in the survey that schools were not the preferred platform for climate education, and that emerged as one of the findings. So what are the mindsets, in your opinion, of these organizations? And is there a particular reason why people don't think schools are the preferred platform?
Okay, sure. So I'll answer the second question first. Why schools are not the preferred platform? So the majority of respondents who responded to that question were youth, right? So it was very interesting that the youth felt that schools were not doing enough to be the focal points for ESD. Why this is so, you know, I can't give you an accurate answer at the moment. We have to dig deep into this further. But I think a lot of it stems from how teaching is approached in our schools in Malaysia. I think earlier somebody mentioned, I think it was Radhika, who mentioned that we need to move away from traditional ways of teaching and learning, right? Unfortunately, schools, in Malaysia are still very, very traditional in its approach. It's very one way. Teachers do not have enough training or capacity building, I think, also to teach about the SDGs or to teach about sustainability or to teach about climate change. So we are hoping, things will change now with the new blueprint in force. On the first question, it was on challenges faced when embedding ESD, right?
In
That was
teacher
education programs.
SDGs
Okay.
and teacher education programs.
Sure. So I think I will answer this based on my own experience. So when I joined the University of Nottingham in 2022 as head of school, SDGs and sustainability were not something that was mainstream. It wasn't mainstreamed at all. And so when I joined the school, being somebody with expertise in the area and understanding its importance and the university's focus also on the SDGs, I kicked off several initiatives on the ground. Some of it include embedding the SDGs through modules that we teach, changing the way we approach teaching and learning. We moved away from just focusing on the curriculum, but also looking at opportunities outside the classroom. And I always tell my students, teaching doesn't have to be confined to the four walls of the classroom, right? So we started community programs for the students to be involved in, where they can apply the theory that they learn into practice into the classroom. So my students have gone into communities and they have worked with indigenous communities, and they've run climate literacy, ESD literacy workshops and all with these kids. So I think challenges that I faced initially were were interesting. I wouldn't say they are challenges, but they are opportunities actually. I think, sustainability, climate change, ESD, they are all terms that we use very, very easily, but I think we forget that many people don't understand what it is. So getting them to understand what it is, getting them to understand why it is important, and getting them to understand how it affects them would be a good approach to use in trying to overcome any challenges that we see. Short answers, and maybe we can pick this up later during the open Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Subarna. And that's a great segue into our next presentation. And I hope we have some time towards the end for broader discussion. So, Steen, if you can start. Yeah. And Alison will share a slide.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor for me to share climate change education in Indonesia. Yeah, so I'm Stin Matakupan from Center for Education and Policy Research. Next slide, please. And we is an independent organization. So we take side with children, prioritize the interests and welfare of children. When we do the advocation, we use the data, so science-based. So we relies on empirical data, scientific evidence, and proven good practices. We are independent and inclusive also. Yeah. Next, please. Yeah, so this is the way we work. We do the research we do the advocation, and we work with the stakeholders in the implementation phase as well. So then it become a feedback loop for the policy. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, and yeah, we established since 2015, and yeah, become a supportive and critical perspective in advocating policy that favor the children. So climate change education is one of it. Yeah. So next slide, please. I'm going to talk about the climate change. Indonesia, we are a diverse ecosystem. Yeah, and then we are very rich in biodiversity, and lots of flora, fauna. Yeah, but in terms of climate change, we are also vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Next slide, please. Yeah. So you can see here, even I mentioned earlier, we are vulnerable to climate change, but we also put effort to reduce our emission over time. So you can see from the graph on the right side that forest and land use change, speed fires is reduced. So in my personal perspective, we do lots of effort to reduce the climate change. Yeah, and even there are lots of disaster in Indonesia, and then yeah, lots of things happen, but we are still doing our best. Talking about climate change education, similar to what Rosiana and then the previous speakers said, there are lots of misconceptions, yeah, including among teachers and policymakers that, for instance, climate crisis is a fake news, is a natural process, okay, and then warming the earth temperature 1 or 2 degrees will not give any effects. And even some say that climate crisis will not affect us. So we are doing when we did the focus group discussion, we found some of these misconceptions that we need to help them clarify during the program. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I did the research as well on student citizenship behavior. It's to identify the quality of activities conducted by a person towards the environment. Yeah, and then I found that the personal commitment, personal investment in terms of time, money, it actually give effect to the citizenship behavior. Personal commitment and personal investment affect intention to act, and then intention to act also then give effect to citizenship behavior. This is what I did research, and then it become my reference when I work with the government. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the framework we developed in Indonesia on climate change education. We use bicycle model on climate change education. And we modify the learning outcomes with climate relevant competence. And we also required schools to conduct climate based project and focus on Indonesia uniqueness like biodiversity, and then we are rich in the local wisdom, we are rich in all environmental aspects, so based on the local area. Next slide. Yeah, so integrating climate change education into the curriculum, we infuse the principles into intracurricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, and also school culture. So habits and then school policy, we refer to that, and then we identify in which area we can infuse or integrating climate change education. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so the goal is developing a problem-solving mindset. Yeah, then so you can see here we help students to understand, and then they take actions, but then they also share their learning experience to others. So this we develop it with hope that more people, more students aware about what happened in their area. Next. Yeah, and then when we assess students for the project, we ask them to refer to Pancasila student profile. So assess how student independency and collaboration, creative thinking, and then also put how they see the issue from global perspective, and then they also trust God. Yeah, so this is the character that we aim to when we work with students. Next slide. Yeah, and to help teachers, because Indonesia, we have like more than 3 million teachers across Indonesia, so we develop a guidebook for teachers. And technology, since we also have a new curriculum, national curriculum, so technology is introduced to as part of the transformation. We provide platform with rich collection of high quality teaching modules, and it is free resources to be used as inspiration or adapted to teacher specific needs. Okay, and then it also provides courses for teachers to independently learn and also discuss with their colleagues in a learning community. And there are some specific theme related to climate change we provided, like I Love the Earth for elementary school kids, and I Love Indonesia, sustainable lifestyle, and then local wisdom. That's one example. And climate change education become one of the priority issues in our schools. And then the schools, they are required, it's like mandatory to take at least one a theme during the 1 year academic year. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is one of examples that when schools were, and this one in North Sumatra, they work on local wisdom, they learn about weaving, and then they develop the lesson plan, and then identify, since we also refer they need to consider sustainability, so they use natural dyeing and then create a book catalog showcasing weaving patterns and making scarf. So identify what is the local wisdom behind the weaving project. Next. Yeah, that's the challenge. So it's quite similar with other presenters, that limited awareness and understanding of climate change issues, making it difficult to teach and learn about the topic effectively. And yeah, we realize there's still lack of teacher training. Even we provide lots of resources online and then they learn independently, but independent learning is not a habit. So it's still new, but they are try. Yeah, it's promising in my perspective. And resources constraints, of course, school in rural area often lack access to teaching materials such as books or digital resources. And political and institutional support. We know in some area, climate change education may not be prioritized by some policymaker or school principals. So it resulting in limited funding and initiative to promote it in schools. Yeah, so that's from me, and it is promising, and I hope there are lots of good practices will share later, and I'm happy to get in touch with you all and learn together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, for sharing all the rich experience of Indonesia in the area of climate change education, and also for reflecting on some of the challenges in moving forward in this. We have some questions that were included in the chat during your presentation. Let me start with one from Dr. Azra Abdul-Majid, who is asking about the preparation of adaptation mitigation schools as students develop and progress sustainable culture. And let me also couple with another question from Pakistan, from Dr. Abbas, if you can share some thoughts about effective role of the school council, so how the community involvement experience of Indonesia can be effective in other contexts as well.
Wow, great questions. Thank you. Yeah, for the preparation, yeah, sorry. So we work with the curriculum first, identify the competencies and for all grade level students, and then how we infuse climate change principles into that topic. And and then we provide the guidelines. So the very a guidebook that very easy for all teachers to understand, and then do the reflection and work with students. So the detailed teacher guidebook we provide even up to the assessment for students, the sample of assessment. So that's the preparation. So with hopes that all teachers just refer to the book, day one, go to the page 1, and then next day page 2, so something like that. And then school council, yes, that's very important. We have education report. So one of it is the school culture and then school environment. So they refer to the school report and do reflections, and based on the school report, they develop the program. Yeah, but school council in many schools work well, but yeah, I think also happen in many areas that some didn't work well. Yeah. Hope it answered the question.
It certainly does. Thank you very much, Chin, for sharing your experience, your reflections with the audience. We'll continue the conversation. And just to mention also to the participants, we've seen other very interesting questions coming in the chats. We're saving them for last rounds of questions and answers at the end, in which we will have a collective reflection with the speakers. Thank you very much. And in the interest of time, let me now invite our next speaker, Do Duc Lan, who will share with us the experience of climate change and education in Vietnam.
Yeah, thank you, Marina, for your introduction. And I'm very delighted to present the highlights of climate change and education in Vietnam. Of course, like you know, we just have 10 minutes for one presentation. So I hope that my presentation will give you some highlights for the comprehensive presentation. I do think that that should be maybe for the next webinar. And also, I really honored to discuss with all of you about this topic in the case of Vietnam. So in my presentation, there will be the 4 main parts. The first one is about the context of Vietnam and climate change in Vietnam, curriculum and climate change education in Vietnam in perspective of implementing at the school level. And also I also present some recommendation as well. So please next slide, please. So please look at the two pictures on the screen. You have seen that our country is located, I think, not in the center of Southeast Asia, but is in the area which is very vulnerable to be affected by the typhoon, and also by the because of the different varieties of the regions. So we also have to face about some natural disaster such as landslides. And the other thing is we also have the problems of the drought in some provinces in Vietnam. So one of the recent typhoon which hit Vietnam about 2 months ago, that was Yagi, is affected, I think, heavily in 11 provinces out of 25 provinces in the north of Vietnam. And also you can see the picture of some of the collapse of the houses in the regions. So next slide, please. You can see some other pictures. Yeah, please, next slide. The context of Vietnam, because we are frequently threatened by typhoon, floods, droughts, and landslides. So that's why in our country, at the level of the government, we have also the national plan and NAP to 2050, and in the recent 2020 and in coming years 2030. So of course we strictly follow the SDGs goals, sustainable development goals. And also in Vietnam we also have the board of the who follow up and monitoring the SDGs. So we also have the national strategy for climate change. We want to have the net zero emissions in 2050, and also in 2030 we have strategy requires of the near 44 reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So this year in 2024 Vietnam's climate change performance index is ranked at 27th out of 63 countries in the rank. So that is in the middle, in the medium rank. So what it means, of course, in other countries in Asia, so we have learned a lot from our colleagues from Malaysia, from Fiji, and also from Philippines. We have learned that the different contexts, we also have the different solutions. However, we also have to cope with the very common global issues. So next slide, please. In our my presentation, I would like to focus on about the climate change contents in the curriculums, and also this is the first time forever in our curriculum we mentioned about the competency-based curriculum. So in the competency-based curriculum, we also mentioned about the qualities. So when we look at the qualities, we also have some of the very specific qualities the learners at the O levels from the K-12 level from the so for example like love nature, and also they need to take practical actions to protect our nature, and also actively participate in the nature protection activities, and proactively encourage others to join in the nature protection efforts, and also need to engage in the climate change education and also awareness activities held by schools and also at all levels of the education. So next slide, please. In our curriculum, climate change is included in geography, biology, and also natural sciences, and also technology. And we have the new activity we call the experiential activities, and also we have the career guidance. That is something new in our curriculum. So at the level of the junior and senior high school, we have the way of what we call that is the learning attainments for climate change education in a number of the periods. For example, in 12 periods and 27 periods, and we really want to have the integrated education on climate change in the multiple subjects, from the biology, geography, chemistry, science, history, and also next slide, please. For example, like in this that is in the Vietnamese version. However, I would like to have some of the translation here. You can see on the first column, that is about the strands. That is something about, for example, like the topic of that is a natural disaster, about the energy loss, and also about the causes of climate change. That is something that is about the contents on the left side. And though in the second column, that is about the learning attainments the students should have after lessons. For example, like they need to understand about the causes of climate change. They need to display about some solution, some specific solution to prevent the natural disaster, and also to climate change adaptation. And for the third column in here, I listed in the different subjects from the grade 6 to grade 8, and also when we see the interdisciplinary subjects, we can design on some of the topics when we can have the climate change in the practical classes. Next slide, please. So what we can do for the climate change education in school in Vietnam with the new curriculum. Let me provide you one more information about our new curriculum. Before 2020, our curriculum was content-based curriculum, and now that is a competencies-based curriculum. So we really want to have to bring the real-life problems into the curriculum, and so we want to have the students at the highest capabilities to solve the practical problems from the awareness, to the competencies. So what it means, so that's why when we mentioned about the new curriculum from 2020, and now this when 2020 we implemented the curriculum for the grade 1, and for 2021 we have the grade 2 and grade 6, and up to now we have the grade 5, grade 9, grade 12. So in the circle, we have the very completed circle to mention all the things. I mean, not only about the climate change, but also for, I mean, other global issues. So we really want to have the very effective implement, and we need to think about something like climate change education or maybe renewable energy in the new curriculum. How can we do it? We need to have the mapping, and we have the integrating some of the in bigger context like global citizenship education through subjects and educational activities. Next slide, please. I mean, regarding pedagogies, in the new curriculum, we focus on more hands-on and practical experiences. We engage students actively involved in the classes and also educational projects. And we also provide more opportunities for students to explore, to solve problems independently, to develop their competencies of the self-study and self-efficacy. And we also can create the conditions to encourage collaboration and also active participation in the school and also in the community to support them to develop the collaboration and also communication competencies. So we also facilitate them to have the broader impact of the global and also not only global and also the, I mean, in the local issues, to encourage them to emphasize in solutions. So we want to develop, I mean, their problem solving skills and also creativity to build up the, I mean, the from the school to the real life practice. So something now we focus on that should develop the core competencies of students. Yeah, next slide, please. And for the learning activities, we really want to organize more discussion. We organize interconnections environment, from the climate change, environmental issues, the relationship with them, and also with the, I mean, for their participation in the classroom and in the community to develop their knowledge, skills, behaviors, and attitudes and values. So we want to have the very comprehensive something like the whole school approach to promote, I mean, climate change education in school. Yeah, next slide, please. So we are on the way to promote more integration of the climate change education in the education strategy. We are also very consistent, and we are aware of, I mean, to have the climate change education across all levels. So that is what we plan to do. And we also need to have more and more collaboration and support because if we don't have the support from the different coordination and also from the stakeholders, for example, like at the national level with the support of UN agency, with the and support of GPE at the level of, I mean, having the climate education framework. We do need to have it, and we also do need to have, I mean, the involvement of all the stakeholders. For example, like about the local community, we also need to have the involvement from the NGOs and also some private sectors, I mean, to involve in the process to bring more initiatives for the climate change education in school. So at the end of my presentation, I would like to mention that Vietnam has a very big population of 100 million people, more than 23 million students, and also 1.38 million teachers. So with the very big size of the education in terms of, I mean, the number of students and teachers, we need to have more and more comprehensive national plan, I mean, to promote climate change education. So that's why we really want to, to have the discussion. We have open discussion with all stakeholders, from, international organization, and also from the also domestics, organizations, to work together to have the, climate change education, to implement climate change education effectively at the national level and also at the school level. So thank you very much for listening. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lando, for giving us an overview of Vietnam and the efforts that Vietnam has been undertaking to address climate change. I know that we are exactly on the hour, and I ask everyone's a little bit more for us to have a little bit more time for questions directly to Doug Lando, and then a couple of questions that we'll put to all the speakers. So we received a question specifically about your presentation, Doug Lando, which is from a colleague from Room to Read in Vietnam, that asks, how is the monitoring and evaluation process when applying climate change into various subjects and educational activities in Vietnamese curriculum? If you could react to this question.
Yeah, thank you, Zos, and thank you very much, our colleague from Room to Read, Chodan. And I do think that the monitoring process and evaluation process is very important part. So that's why I think for up to now, we don't have the national action plan for climate change education in Vietnam yet. So I do think that the most important thing now, we need to have we have the strategy, but we don't have the action plan. So I think at the level of the ministerial level and also the provincial level, we do think that we should have the master plan, on climate change education. So that's why I think the first step we need to have, like I mentioned before, need to have maybe the heat map or maybe the mapping. Yeah, the mapping of climate change education. So I do think that we need to have the support of GPE or and also your organization as well. And that is the first thing. The second thing that is the monitoring and evaluating process now is still at the school level. So for the provincial level, we just have some, so I should say, administrative statistics. So I think in a way of having the framework, I do think that in the near future, not only the researchers but also for the managers and also at the O levels, we need to have maybe something like the guidelines on the monitoring and evaluating framework. For climate change education at the O levels, from the ministerial level to the school level. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lando. And I think that's a reality in most countries. We are now at the stage that most countries have strategies, but then to have concrete, actionable plans to see with concrete steps is still something that needs to be worked operationally. Now I think it's time to invite all speakers, and let's open here the discussion and address some of the questions that we have been receiving during the webinar. And I invite as well Marina and Aditi to join in this moderation. I can start by reading one question that we had from a colleague from Save the Children in Indonesia that asks, while much of the current discourse around climate change education tends to emphasize resilience and adaptation, how do you see the role and opportunities for mitigation being integrated into educational frameworks? So this is a question open to all speakers who would like to take this first.
Maybe I can just
Please,
give a
Dika, please. Yes.
overview of things here. I think all of these aspects are really important because unfortunately we are not in a position to pick and choose our strategies. They are all our 21st century learning skills that we need to really take over and learn from and integrate all of these aspects into our climate education, which is also integrated in all subjects. So taking all of these aspects across all subjects and doing a mapping of where climate change is regarding mitigation resilience, I think has to be done. There is no way out, unfortunately, given all the current disasters that we are facing, and all of the things that we need to do as individuals to stop the adverse impact on climate. We are not in a position to pick and choose, but I would suggest to like take it on and see how we can use local examples, use local strategies and actions to drive this change within the education system.
Anyone else would like to? We can take one more voice here in this question. Anyone else would like? Stian, please go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of students and teachers, I may suggest to take them to work in their local area, identify issues in their local area. So what is the issue related to the climate change? And then what is the causes, the impact, and what can they do? And then they can work together with the communities. That's the important part of teachers, to facilitate students to have a creative thinking and then try to solve the problems and then do something in their daily life. They make a commitment and work together with their peers. Yeah, that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Subarna, you also had unmuted
Yeah.
yourself. And then we go to
Yes.
Rosie, and then we have one more question. So let's go for that.
So sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to add something on in universities, programs, educational programs have opportunities to integrate industry into the planning of the curriculum. So I think that is another area that we could potentially capitalize on, which universities are not doing very well at the moment. So bringing in industry players, bringing in civil society organizations, bringing in NGOs to co-develop the curriculum, I think could be an opportunity here. And I agree with Radhika, we shouldn't be just looking at it from a mitigation perspective, but looking at it with a 360-degree view, because the workforce of the future is going to be very different. So we need to embed current challenges within the workforce, and we will only know this if we integrate industry voices into the curriculum. So that's my short answer to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Subarna. Rosie, your time. Go ahead.
Okay, I just like to add to the comments. Climate change is a complex topic, and it's understood differently and perceived differently according to our different experiences. But in relation to traditional ecological knowledge, climate change is addressed holistically. So you can't have adaptation without mitigation. Mitigation is usually the first defense, and in creating awareness in our Veitalanoa or discussion with communities, using the participatory action research approach, first we find out what are their experiences and how are they dealing with it, and how can we together address, create interventions that are relevant to addressing what their climate issue. So that's something that we are doing in our research network with other universities, not just in Fiji, but across the world. Our network is called the Climate U Network, or the Transforming Universities for Changing Climate. And the other program that we are doing, we are part of as an implementing agency, is the Pacific Regional Education Framework. Through the Pacific Regional Education Framework, the University of the South Pacific is one of its implementing agencies. So through this program, we're able to work with other teacher training institutions and other countries in identifying the needs, and also trying to assist in how we can weave climate change and traditional ecological knowledge of climate change in their policies, in their curriculum, in their resources, and in education in general, but not just compartmentalizing it to education, but interdisciplinary or sectoral, because climate change affects everyone, and every different sectors have their responsibilities in addressing climate change.
Thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much to all panelists for these reflections. We have one more question that is really on that same spirit of reflecting on the topic a bit on a broader perspective. That question came from Deepa Dahal in Nepal. And they are asking, how can we extend climate education beyond the classroom, fostering it as a shared societal responsibility? And what strategies can effectively engage diverse demographic groups beyond students to cultivate widespread environmental awareness and collective action?
I can go first. Can I? Yeah. Okay. So what we do in Malaysia is that in our higher education programs and in universities offering, obviously universities offer higher education programs. Yeah, I'm tired. Okay. What we have is a component called service-based learning. I think this is very common in universities, right? So service-based learning is a compulsory module that all our students have to take, and they need to pass this module. So this is a component that's not structured per se, but it's very project-based. Students go into communities and do work on the ground with communities, trying to solve or provide short-term or mid-term or even long-term solutions to specific problems communities are facing. And a lot of these problems are very related to environmental issues, climate change issues, or social issues. So that is one area I think we could explore, not only within higher education, but also within schools, in fact. And in approaching service-based learning, I think, and in assessing students in service-based learning, what we need to be also doing is integrating community participation into these assessments. So, for example, if I'm one of the supervisors on the project, I'm not the only one assessing the project, but I get the communities impacted by that project or the beneficiaries to come in and assess as well. So this gives a broader perspective to the problem, and hopefully students get to experience diverse voices and diverse needs of stakeholders. We've done that in Malaysia. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subarna. Are there any other inputs from the other speakers? Yes, please do.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I do think that everything should start from trust building. So not only climate change education, but also for the other issues. But I think climate change education is and climate change is something not all of the people having the common sense and also the common understanding. So for the case of Vietnam, in some reasons, the people, they usually have to cope with the natural disaster. They are, but it's not easy, but it's how should I say, it's quite comfortable for them. To learn about, to work with the schools to develop the climate change education program. But for other reasons, because the people, they have not, they have not seen a lot of climate change consequences. So they have different ideas. So I think raising the awareness, by building the trust building and also empathy between the different stakeholders is very important. So that's why I do think that the initiatives from students, from the local people should be very important part to engage other people in the any program. Because if we don't have the participation from the people who are in the community, we cannot have the climate change educational program being implemented effectively. So that is from my side, empathy and also trust building. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duklando. I would like to ask our next speakers, I think, Chin, you are the first to raise your hands. If you can share some brief reflections, just in the interest of time.
Yeah, thank you. So reactivate education ecosystem. I think it is one of the strategy. So we gather all the people with the same perception, with the same commitment, and identify issues. And it includes government, private company, and also NGOs, so everyone, and identify issues, and then see what the policy that we can develop with, and yeah, work together. So once we work together, it's like it takes a village to raise a child. So the same things happen also for climate change education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rosianna, also if you can be brief. Thank you.
Just to mention that all these community actions, national actions, they are aligned to global priorities and global strategies and implementation. So those are our guiding instruments or guiding documents that will help have a trickle-down effects to our communities. If these documents allow for this to happen, then we'll be able to make impact down in the communities. We need to have the political will to ensure that climate justice is achieved. And if we don't reach the community, then we haven't attained climate justice. And unless we have climate justice, we can't prepare our people for climate change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rosianna. Radhika, some final reflections from you?
Yeah, just very briefly, I agree with all my co-panelists on all of the things that they mentioned. Just one thing I wanted to add was that sometimes we feel that climate education we have to look for like a climate related area. Even if you are looking at gender, it is related to climate. If you are looking at industries, any aspect that we are looking at, it will have its connections to climate. So I think we need to somehow broaden our scope and look at all the NGOs, industries in our areas. And even if they are working on like, whatever aspect, I think it will be related to climate. So just looking at it in a much more broad way so that then students can make those connections. I think that will be another way of looking at things rather than just focusing on a climate job or a climate focused NGO. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And thanks to all wonderful panelists. I'll now hand over to Aditi Desai, who will share with us some closing remarks.
Thanks, Marina. And thanks once again to all our speakers and also all our participants, especially since we've run over. But thanks, really appreciate you staying till the end. I think we've learned a lot, and unfortunately, we weren't able to tackle all the questions. But I think that's a good sign that this is just the start of the conversation. And we'll continue to engage in this thematic area, including in the future KIX EMAP Hub activities, considering how important it is and also just how many different perspectives there are to address and tackle and keep continuing the conversation. We'll also be sharing a post-event survey with all of you, and it would be really great. And the link, the QR code link is on the screen, but it would be really helpful to hear, how the event went and also what other areas you're probably interested in. And thanks once again, and looking forward to staying connected.